Hello, hello, hello. Happy Tuesday, everybody. It's good to see you guys. How is everyone today? Oh, yes, I spruced up the intro. I needed a new one. It's shorter, less flashes, all the things. I just needed something a little different. I hope you guys like it. Let me know if you do. So, what I wanted to do tonight is I have been anxiously anticipating this show, Monsters, about the Menendez brothers, right? It's coming out on Netflix. It's supposed to premiere the 19th. Now, I have been looking all over the internet, like how I feel about when in doubt, Google out. And I can't find if they're going to release all of the episodes at once because Netflix has been doing something new where they're releasing like part of it at one time. And then, after a few weeks or a month or whatever, then they'll release the rest of the episodes. But from everything that I am seeing, it seems like it'll be all at once. And I kind of wanted to, I followed this case. It happened in 1989. And so I would have been, let me think, I was 77, 89, 88 would have been 10, so 11 or 12 when this happened. And I remember like that, like 2020 and stuff like that. My mom was watching it. And, but then when they went to trial in 93, then I was older and I was 16 then. And I remember thinking, just based on like being young and the, the news, the 48 hours, 2020, Barbara Walters, all the things, right? Thinking to myself, because of the way that those shows were portrayed, that they probably did do it to get their inheritance. And then when I watched the trial and I was older, I was still skeptical, right? But then when Erik testified, I don't know, something like changed for me because I felt like in 1993 for a victim of um, molestation by anybody, right? But especially by their parent and especially a male in 1993 to get up there and testify like that, knowing there were cameras in the courtroom and it was being played on court TV and stuff like that. I thought that that took a lot of courage to do something like that, and surely um, he wouldn't get up there and lie like that. Surely he wouldn't just do that to avoid prison time. Well, I was 16 then, or 15, almost 16, whatever. And now I think about it and I think, well, yeah, somebody absolutely would do that to get, I'm older now. I'm a little more jaded. I've seen a lot of stuff happen in true crime cases, but is it possible that somebody would do that? Well, yes, because we all witnessed, the snot fest that was Alec Murdaugh up on the stand, during his trial. And although it's not the same lie, it's still lying. And, he came clean about being an addict. But why did he come clean about being an addict? Not because he felt ashamed for what he did, right? It was, in my opinion anyway, an attempt to elicit sympathy from the jury and for them to believe his version of events versus all the physical and all the other evidence that the state was putting on, right? So I was, I'm still on the fence about how I feel about this crime, and what the punishment should be. I will say this. Eric's attorney, Leslie Abramson, she, I remember when I watched like this trial, I thought I was really impressed by her because how vehemently she advocated for her client. And I thought, it was impressive to me. It seemed like they had like a genuine relationship, that they were more than just attorney client, that like they actually had like a friendship. She to me anyways, it seemed like she cared very deeply for him. She was very worried about him. And so I was impressed by that. And you know, I think it's interesting that, so the way that it happened, just if you guys don't remember, you didn't watch, or you're like a million sparkles over here and you were just like a kid and shouldn't have been watching this kind of trial. Anyway, what happened is when they were charged, okay, Lyle and Erik were charged with the murder of their parents, Jose and Kitty Menendez. They were tried together, but they had separate juries, which I always, that it was, like when it was happening, I was new to, of course, I didn't know anything about the legal system. So I was just watching it and I was just fascinated by it. So they had actually two trials. So in 1993 was their first trial, and both of the juries were hung. So there was a mistrial that was declared. And then they were retried again in 96. And that time they were found guilty. But in the second trial, they did not allow the testimony about the abuse to come in. And so they've been appealing their case ever since. And this year, Peacock did a documentary that was Menendez brothers adjacent. It was a good documentary. Basically, it was about the members of Menudo in the first early days of Menudo. And the tie was that one of the boys was brought over to the Menendez house and to have dinner. And he alleges that Jose abused him. And so a lot of this sparked a lot of controversy and sort of rejuvenated the interest in this case. And I remember it was all over TikTok because little Minnie Bendy came to me and she says, so cute. She says, "Mom, do you know anything about the Menendez brothers?" And I said, "Well, yeah. Why?" And she was telling me like it's all over TikTok. And I was like, "Oh, show me." So I looked, and yeah, I was like, wow. And then in 2017, Lifetime did a movie about the Menendez brothers, and Courtney Love was played Kitty Menendez, and she was almost unrecognizable to me in that Lifetime movie. It took me a minute to realize, oh, holy hell, that is Courtney Love, which, I do have, I feel some type of way about Courtney Love, and everybody knows that. So I wanted to like re-watch parts of their trial because what I learned from Monster, Jeffrey Dahmer, that what's his name? Why can't I think right now? I'm sorry, you guys. Ryan Murphy was part of. They did an incredible job on the research and putting that story together. And there is an element in the Jeffrey Dahmer monster story that is highly controversial, and it didn't really get talked about too terribly much, and that is the how it was portrayed in Monster was the Tony, the guy that couldn't, the deaf guy. It's been alleged over the years, going way, way back, that there was some type of relationship between him and Dahmer. They knew each other. And I think that Ryan Murphy and his crew heard that story repeated enough that they felt like it was important to be included. And that's why it was included in that way. But there are also an equal number of people that say they didn't know each other, that, they were complete strangers. They didn't have any type of friendship like that. That, frankly, Jeffrey Dahmer is incapable of having a friendship. And so that it was preposterous that maybe he wasn't a complete stranger in that he'd never seen him before, but that because they frequented the same bar, but that they didn't like actually know each other like that. So that was highly controversial. And so, but I was actually really quite impressed with how thorough Ryan Murphy's portrayal of Jeffrey Dahmer was and of the case. And I think that what I was most impressed by was the he gave the victims humanity, which obviously they're humans. But whenever anybody talks about Jeffrey Dahmer, or when his story gets told, or when it's, portrayed in a movie or whatever, the victims are almost just like an afterthought. They're like a prop. They're not really focused on. It's sort of like having, a couch or a picture or something in the room with Jeffrey Dahmer. Jeffrey's the focus, and what he did, and all of that is the entire focus of every portrayal. But I thought that Ryan Murphy did a really good job in getting the audience to understand who the victims were as people, because they are people. They're not just Jeffrey Dahmer's victims, right? They were somebody's brother, somebody's son, somebody's, uncle, all of those things. They had full lives, and that was taken from him. So I was very, very impressed with that. And I'm really curious to see how Ryan Murphy is going to tackle handling the Kitty and Jose Menendez, because they are they're complex people. There's many, human beings, I always say this, are multifaceted. So I am curious about how he's going to handle that, and also because it is based on the crime, and the trials were huge. And so I don't know if he'll cover the trials or not, or how he'll do that, but the best way I can do it, right, is to cover the trials, because that's why I wanted to watch it, because that's where the evidence comes out, right? That's where the facts of the case come out. That's where they tie everything together. And I just thought I know everybody, because I am too, has been really fascinated and watching a lot of the stuff that's coming out, the evidence and the interviews and stuff that's coming out in the Madeline Soto case. And although we've been inundated with so much information, we have so many pieces to the puzzle, we still don't have all the pieces to the puzzle yet, and we're not sure how some of this evidence fits together. And so the trials will learn that. So anyway, that's my little soapbox. Hey, I'm Kayleen. Good to see you. And so that's my little tangent, and I will now stop being on a tangent and let's start watching this. There's a little moment I wanted to share that is the beginning of the trial that happens outside of the presence of the jury. And I wanted to show that to you guys because it's important and it sets up something, and it kind of just explains the way that the judge is going to run this whole situation. So we're just going to listen to a little bit of that, and then we're going to skip through and get to the opening statements. Now, tonight, I think we're only going to have time probably for the opening statements for Lyle Menendez. So, but I'm going to keep up with this. Also, tomorrow is Wednesday, which you guys know what that means. A new episode of Bedtime Books with Bendy will be available at 9 p.m. Eastern Time. So if you're a Patreon member, that'll be ready for you guys. And one other last thing before I forget, Sarah Boone has a hearing the 19th at 1:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I will, if it is available to be streaming, y'all know that I will be streaming. I'm going to go live a little earlier than that. I'm going to go live at noon because I want to show you the things that have been filed. Spoiler alert, Sarah Boone has not just one attorney, but now 2 attorneys. That's right. There's somebody else that signed up for this dumpster fire of a client, and which I think is great because everybody deserves to be represented by an attorney. So that will be the 19th. Also, I almost forgot about this too. This is important that happened today. I had intended on streaming the Donna Adelson trial, because as you know, I was fascinated with Charlie's trial. I'm fascinated with that case. I want Dan Markell to get justice. And personally, I don't think that he'll get complete justice until Wendy is sitting at the defense table, but that's just my opinion. Anywho, quite a kerfuffle. The trial has been delayed because Charlie Adelson's attorney is also representing Donna Adelson, and he had signed a waiver and had agreed to testify. And then his appellate attorney said, no. And his attorney had to withdraw from the case. So co-counsel had to take over, and now he needs extra time. Blah, 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 blah. Hello, Johnson. So that's what's going on. So anyway, Bedtime Books with Bendy tomorrow night on Patreon, 9:00. The episode drops. And Boone has her court hearing. They're going to be arguing whether or not she can use the battered spouse defense. I'll be going live to stream that if it's available to stream. If not, it'll be uploaded at some point, and you know that I'll go live that evening and we will talk all about it, because I am just dying to hear her attorneys, because I thought their answer was fantastic, and I was leaning more towards what they were saying, but now, we have to have a hearing. So anyway, that's what's going on. Let's play this. Let me turn the closed captions on and go.
Defendants are in court with their attorneys and the people are represented. And we had one matter to discuss before opening statements, and that has to do with the interviews that were conducted at the Beverly Hills Police Station by Sergeant Edmonds of each defendant. And each defendant has objected to the admission of that statement before the jury that is trying him, that was a statement made solely exposed to it in any way. It requires
Hold on.
remind you now and throughout the trial, your concern is to decide the case of People versus Joseph Lyle Menendez, and only that case. There will be another jury that will be in court.
Me too, MK. I was like 15 or 16 when this trial happened.
Erik Galen Menendez. He is in court today, and you have not seen him before in these proceedings. He is the gentleman. I'll ask you to stand, Mr. Menendez. This is Erik Galen Menendez. He is the co-defendant. Thank you, sir. And the other jury will be the jury that decides his case. Your job, as I've indicated, is to decide the case of Joseph Lyle Menendez and other people.
All right, so that's really all I wanted you guys to see, is that they're going to have two separate juries, and then they will take turns being seated in different spots, because the courtroom is only so big, so they actually have to sit in where the audience usually sits. So they're going to rotate it out. And the jurors for Lyle Menendez have gold stickers on their jury badges and the gold stars. And the jurors for Erik have blue stars on their jury badges. And he wanted to remind the jury that they cannot commingle. And they're, so yeah. I thought that it's just interesting how they did this. I don't think I've ever seen it done this way before or since. That doesn't mean it hasn't happened. It just means I can't remember. So here we go. Let's get to the opening statements. Also, I want to make a reference to Leslie Abramson's hair. She's giving me Glenn Close in Fatal Attraction hair, but I just noticed that, and it makes sense because about the time. So whatever, I just wanted to make that known. That's all. Where is the
prosecution?
All right, here we go.
And good morning. I'm going to repeat exactly what the judge just told you because it's an important legal concept. What I'm going to outline here in the next 20 minutes to half an hour is an overview of what the people anticipate the evidence will show. But what I'm going to tell you is not evidence. It's merely an aid so that when you hear the evidence as we present it, you have some sort of context into which to place it so it doesn't come to you in a vacuum. And this is what the people believe the evidence will show. On August the 20th of 1989, at approximately 11:47 p.m., Beverly Hills Police Dispatcher Christina Nye received a 911 call at the police station. On the line was Lyle Menendez, who sounded hysterical, reporting that, quote, "someone shot my mom and my dad," end quote. You will hear that 911 tape, and you will hear the emotion manifested in that phone call. Police officers from the Beverly Hills Police Department arrived at the scene 722 North Elm Drive in under 5 minutes. Police officer Michael Butkus and Sergeant Kirk West, both of the Beverly Hills Police Department, will testify in this case. Officer Butkus arrived at the scene first. He approached the house, and shortly thereafter, he heard screaming as the two defendants, Erik Menendez and Lyle Menendez, came running out the front door. Officer Butkus will describe the demeanor of the defendants that night in their first contact with the police. Sergeant West was one of the last units to arrive at the scene in response to the initial radio dispatch. Sergeant West and other officers entered the house to determine what had happened and to determine if the killers were still inside of the house. Sergeant West will describe his discovery of the bodies of Jose Enrique Menendez and Mary Louise Menendez inside of the family room of the Menendez home that night. Sergeant West determined that both victims were dead, and he also noticed that pellet patterns he observed in the room indicated to him that a shotgun had been used in the killings. Sergeant West is familiar with shotguns, and he did not notice any visual signs of shotgun smoke, nor did he smell any shotgun smoke in the room. Neither did he see any signs of expended shotgun shells. He also noticed that both the television set and the lights were on inside of that room where the bodies were found. The police proceeded through the house, and Sergeant West noticed that there were 2 rifles inside a closet in a bedroom upstairs. Sergeant West also searched a guest house in the back of the Menendez property. The lights were on inside of the guest house, and its front door was open. No other weapons were noticed or recovered at the crime scene that night, aside from the 2 rifles seen in the upstairs closet by Sergeant West. Both of the defendants were taken to the police station to be interviewed. The house was now off limits while the police and coroner's personnel began the grim task of examining the Menendez home and its contents. At 1:42 a.m., 2 hours after the 911 call, Sergeant Thomas Edmonds, also of the Beverly Hills Police Department, spoke with Lyle Menendez to find out what he knew about the events of that evening and who might have committed this crime. Lyle Menendez told Sergeant Edmonds that he and his brother had gone to the movies that night at Century Plaza, and then had gone to the Santa Monica Civic Center to attend a food and wine tasting function. Lyle Menendez told Sergeant Edmonds that he was supposed to meet a friend of his by the name of Perry Berman at the Santa Monica Civic Center. Lyle Menendez told Sergeant Edmonds that he and his brother had missed Mr. Berman at the Santa Monica Civic Center, and so Lyle Menendez called Mr. Berman from a payphone at the Civic Center. Lyle Menendez used a U.S. Sprint calling card registered to his father, Jose Menendez, and the records of that transaction show 2 phone calls made to Perry Berman from a payphone at the Santa Monica Civic at 11:07 and 11:15 p.m. Lyle Menendez went on to tell Sergeant Edmonds that during these 2 telephone calls, he arranged to meet Perry Berman at a restaurant in Beverly Hills instead that night. Lyle Menendez continued and told Sergeant Edmonds that he and his brother returned home to pick up some sort of identification for Erik Menendez, which would enable him to enter a bar should they and Perry Berman decide to go for drinks. Lyle Menendez told Sergeant Edmonds that the defendants entered the house, found their parents, and called the police. Lyle Menendez specifically mentioned the smell of smoke in reference to entering the room where his parents' bodies were found. Contrast this with the statement of Sergeant West that when he entered the family room, he neither saw nor smelled.
Okay, I got to pause for fair use. Sprinkle Donut says, in my opinion, if this case was tried today, it would have a very different outcome. I'm curious about that, and here's why. Okay, so putting their defense aside, just put that aside for a minute, okay? Because obviously the first people who are going to do all the talking is the prosecution, right? And in today's world, there was computer searches done back in 1989. There were Lyle was looking for files that might have pertained to Kitty and Jose's will, and I'm curious, like if that were done today, we would have been able, I mean, can you imagine what we would have seen in the search history and then the calls that were made and just all of the forensics that would have been different today versus back then. And then so then thinking about that, then you hear that you have all that as a juror, right? That's presented to you. And then Erik and Lyle get on the stand and they testify to this horrific abuse. And not just Erik and Lyle get on the stand. There were other people, other family members that got up on the stand also and testified to having witnessed things that were just not quite right. And the texts, all of the evidence that would have, the digital evidence that would have been, admitted into this case, because there was a lot of communicating going on. And the majority of the communication that was going on back in 89 and 90 would have been via the telephone, obviously voice, notes. But if it were taking place today, I do think there would have been a certain number of, voice calls, but I also think there would have been a lot of texting and a lot of searching. And I actually kind of wonder if there would be more clear-cut evidence, is what I guess I'm trying to say. I don't know. I still don't know how I feel about all of this.
Smelled smoke. Sergeant Edmonds asked Lyle Menendez if he had any idea.
Hold on. I want to replay this because this comes up. Next thing that she says, and it is an important detail. All right, here we go.
Called the police. Lyle Menendez specifically mentioned the smell of smoke in reference to entering the room where his parents' bodies were found. Contrast this with the statement of Sergeant West that when he entered the family room, he neither saw nor smelled smoke. Sergeant Edmonds asked Lyle Menendez if he had any idea as to who would have done this crime. Lyle Menendez opined that his father would probably be the reason for the murders, that it would have been business related, and that some of the people affiliated with his father's business were seedy. Lyle Menendez also told Sergeant Edmonds that he knew that there were 2 rifles inside of the house and that his mother had just purchased one of them. Lyle Menendez went on to say that he called the police shortly after discovering his parents' bodies and that the police came pretty quickly. In describing the crime scene, Lyle Menendez told Sergeant Edmonds the following. It doesn't seem like they heard anything because they were on the couch, and my dad is usually pretty deaf to hear something. So when he gets up right away, and he continued on, so I was really surprised that he was sitting on the couch like that. My mother was on the floor, like she was trying to get away or something. Sergeant Edmonds next spoke to Erik Menendez during those early morning hours. Erik Menendez told Sergeant Edmonds that he and his brother had gone to the movies that night and had gotten lost going to Santa Monica to see Perry Berman.
Okay, I want to rewind that last part really quickly. And the reason I want to rewind that part is because that statement, he got up, that is, it's clear that, and this is what I find interesting about this case, is that Lyle and Erik are not saying they didn't commit this crime. But what they are really arguing is that the state has the motive incorrect and that it wasn't about the money. They had access to money. It wasn't about that. It was about, the Jose was, according to them, very controlling. He controlled every aspect of their lives, where they would go to school, them playing tennis, who their friends could be, who their friends could not be, just, micromanaging at just the ultimate helicopter parent, according to the brothers. And that's what, and then on top of it, the abuse. And so they say that is the motive for it. And I think, and the state knows that what their defense is going to be because, they've gone through all the pretrial and stuff. So they know. And I think what they're doing here is they're setting it up like this was an ambush, not self-defense, which that's what they have to do because they're to prove their case. And there is part of me that while even if I 100% believe that everything that happened to Lyle and Erik is exactly the way they say that it happened, if I believe them 100%, right? It wasn't, it feels like they had other options. And it does feel like they have to pay for what they did because that's not the correct, we don't go, it's just not the right behavior. And so it feels to me like they do need to, that is what they did was a crime and they do need to pay for their crime. But do they need to be, look at Gypsy. She got 10 years. 10. And Dee Dee's murder was far, although the crime scene at the Menendez household was like gory. The medical examiner testified that essentially it was over pretty quickly. Like they probably didn't even feel anything, right? And I get the reason I mention that is because it gets brought up that Lyle said that on some level that gave him some type of he felt better about things, that they didn't suffer. So, I find that to be interesting, that it's just interesting to me that they got life without the possibility of parole, right? And Gypsy got 10 years. It seems disproportionate, right? I don't know. All right, let's keep going.
A neighbor of the Menendezes who lives 2 doors south of their home will testify that she heard popping noises that night at around 10 p.m., almost 2 hours before the 911 call made by Lyle Menendez. This neighbor thought the noises were made by firecrackers, and so she dissuaded her son from calling the police. When detectives arrived at the crime scene, they too saw the bodies discovered by Sergeant West. The detectives also saw that there were no expended shotgun shells in the room where the murders had occurred. Perry Berman will be a witness in this case. He is the young man who was to meet the Menendez brothers at the Santa Monica Civic Center. He will tell you that on the afternoon before the killings, that is the afternoon of August the 20th, he arrived home to find a message on his answering machine from Lyle Menendez. When he finally reached Lyle Menendez by phone, Lyle Menendez wanted to see him that night. Perry Berman had already made plans to go to the food and wine tasting event in Santa Monica, but he invited Lyle Menendez to join Perry and a friend of his with whom he had already made plans. Perry Berman will tell you that he did not see Lyle Menendez in Santa Monica, and he went home to bed. Around 11 o'clock that night, Mr. Berman received a telephone call from Lyle Menendez, who urged him to meet with the Menendez brothers at their parents' home in Beverly Hills, whereupon they would go somewhere else to eat. Not wanting to disturb the Menendez parents, Perry Berman agreed to meet Lyle Menendez at the Cheesecake Factory in Beverly Hills, which is a restaurant. Mr. Berman dressed, went to the Cheesecake Factory, and waited for a half hour for the defendants to arrive. While there, the night silence was broken by the sound of sirens, and after concluding that the brothers were not going to show up, Mr. Berman went towards the Menendez home. When he got there, he saw the police, whose sirens he had heard while waiting at the restaurant. Forensic criminalists from the Sheriff's Department will testify about some of the conclusions which can and cannot be made from looking at the photographs of the crime scene in this case. A doctor from the coroner's office who performed the autopsies on Mr. and Mrs. Menendez will describe the wounds which ended the lives of these victims. The coroner's representative will tell you that Mr. Menendez had 5 shotgun wounds, the major one being an entrance wound to the back of Mr. Menendez's head. He will also tell you that Mrs. Menendez had 10 separate shotgun wounds, some of which could have been caused by the same blast. An expert on firearms will testify as to the workings of a shotgun, shotgun pellet patterns, and other things specific to this crime scene. The head of the Sheriff's Serology Department will tell you that Jose Menendez was not killed precisely in the position in which you will see him in the photographs, due to the pooling of blood on the family sofa. He will also tell you what can and cannot be said about this crime scene. Shortly after the killings, Lyle Menendez began to spend money, a lot of money. On Thursday, August the 24th, he, in the company of his brother, purchased 3 Rolex watches and some money clips. On September the 8th of 1989, 19 days after the killings, a life insurance policy which had been procured earlier by Jose Menendez was paid to the defendants. The policy cumulatively was for $650,000, and over a period of a week between September the 8th and September the 15th, $325,000 was paid out to each defendant. Lyle Menendez returned to the Princeton, New Jersey area after a memorial service for his parents, which was held in Los Angeles on August the 25th of 1989. Lyle Menendez had been a student at Princeton University in the spring of 1989, and the family had lived in the township of Princeton before moving to California earlier. During the initial few days of his stay in Princeton, Lyle Menendez hired bodyguards to guard him. Lyle Menendez and his bodyguards traveled around Princeton in limousines during this period. Richard Wenskowski was hired as one of those bodyguards. He will testify in this case, and Mr. Wenskowski will tell you that one day he accompanied Lyle Menendez to the airport so that Lyle Menendez could make a quick trip from the East Coast to the West Coast. You will learn from other evidence that once in Los Angeles, Lyle Menendez hired a computer expert named Howard Witkin to access the Menendez family's home computer. Lyle Menendez had Howard Witkin, the computer expert, look through the family's computer menu for 4 different headings. Those headings were entitled Eric, Will, Lyle, and Menendez. Mr. Witkin found files with 3 of these headings, but there was no information of any use in those computer files. Lyle Menendez asked Mr. Witkin to erase the entire computer so that he could sell the computer. Mr. Witkin did so and was paid with a check drawn on the account of Jose Menendez for $150. The computer was erased by Mr. Witkin on August the 31st, 1989, 11 days after the deaths of Mr. and Mrs. Menendez. Mr. Wenskowski will also tell you that he had a conversation with Lyle Menendez, during which Lyle Menendez asked him if ballistics evidence could be used to trace an expended shotgun shell to a particular weapon. Mr. Wenskowski told him no. After erasing the computer, Lyle Menendez returned to Princeton the same day. Sometime after the computer's erasure, Lyle Menendez had a conversation with his best friend, Glenn Stevens. Mr. Stevens was a student at Princeton University in the fall of 1989 and had been enrolled with Lyle Menendez during the spring semester of 1989, some several months before. Lyle Menendez told his best friend, Glenn Stevens, after the killings, that Lyle's uncle Carlos had found something in the family computer which was under one of 3 headings. Lyle Menendez told Glenn Stevens that Lyle Menendez's father had been upset with him and that if there was a new will in the computer, he, Lyle, might not be in it. Lyle Menendez told him that the will that the family was aware of, that is the other relatives in the family, had left everything to Lyle Menendez and his brother. Lyle Menendez told Mr. Stevens that the person he had hired to erase the computer was some little Jewish guy, that no one would ever be able to find him. On December the 5th of 1989, several months now after the murders, the police found Mr. Witkin. They served a search warrant at 722 North Elm Drive and recovered the family's computer. Alongside the computer was a receipt for services rendered dated August the 31st, 1989. And this receipt led the police to the discovery of Mr. Witkin. On September the 17th, now going backwards, but September the 17th, less than a month after the killings, Beverly Hills police detectives interviewed Lyle Menendez at the home of one of his relatives in New Jersey. The conversation dealt with various habits of the victims, with the activities of the Menendez family the weekend of the killings, possible motives for the killings, and the activities of the defendants on the evening of the killings. Lyle Menendez told the police that the night before the killings, which would have been Saturday, August the 19th, the Menendez family had gone night fishing and had gotten home about 12:30 a.m. early on Sunday morning. He told the police that he and his brother went to the movies the night of the killings, that he and his brother went to see License to Kill, but that it was sold out, and so they saw Batman instead, and it was a movie they had both seen previously. After the movie, Lyle Menendez and his brother, in his brother's car and with his brother driving, had gone to Santa Monica to meet Perry Berman, and they had gotten lost along the way. Lyle Menendez explained to the detectives that he hadn't seen Mr. Berman in 3 weeks prior to the killings, that he had a lot of things going on that he wanted to talk to Mr. Berman about, and that, quote, I had to go see him, unquote. He also acknowledged that Perry Berman worked on Monday, that he'd called him at about 11 or 11:15 to meet at the Cheesecake Factory, and Lyle acknowledged that this was his idea. He explained that he and his brother went back to the house to get phony ID so that his brother could go drink if necessary, which is when they found their parents. Lyle Menendez again mentioned the smoke to the detectives on September the 17th. He mentioned the smoke that he saw in the room upon the discovery of his parents' bodies. He said the police were called right away and arrived right away. Lyle Menendez was asked by the detectives about his parents' sleeping habits, particularly about whether they would fall asleep while watching television. Lyle Menendez told the detectives that his father would fall asleep in a movie just like that, but that his mother had insomnia, so whether or not she would fall asleep was a matter of how tired she was. He also said that his father was not easily awakened, but that his mother awoke easily.
Okay, I got to pause for fair use. So I wanted to touch on this computer situation. So okay, well, let me find Chicken Shite's question. So Chicken Shite said, I wonder if they still had the computer, that they would be able to retrieve stuff on it now. Yes. Okay. But there's some caveats to that. If they had taken the computer into custody, right, and kept it as evidence, all right, meaning it would, and left it like that, nothing that, it was never used at all, right, then yes. So the way when you like erase data and stuff, it's never gone for good. Even like when you empty your recycle bin, all the things, right? It's not gone until it gets overwritten. So once the data that you've said, okay, I don't care about this anymore, what files, whatever, pictures. I just did a huge cleanup of my computer today because I had, all the stuff that from everything that I've, all different projects. Anyway, that's not the point. So I emptied the recycle bin. If my computer were to be seized right now, all that stuff that I deleted would be recoverable because it's not been overwritten yet. So once it gets overwritten, then it's gone for good. They were even, because remember when Casey Anthony was on trial and they downloaded her computer. Well, at that time, they didn't have the technology and the programs that they have now. And so there was a special on A&E about that case and stuff that, has sort of new information, right? Not completely new. Like we knew that there had been searches done, but some searches and stuff were deleted and they were not recoverable. But with the, advancements in technology and programming, they were able to be retrieved. And so stuff like that can be retrieved. So if they would have left it, if they had the computer and they were to download it today, yeah, they would be able to get all that stuff off of it. All right, I will absolutely watch this and I will see what I need to do to make it transformative enough that I won't get dinged. Sprinkle Donut, I am on the fence about it because I do find that there is compelling evidence of abuse, essays to be specific. But they also did some things that have me like scratching my head. And I'm not, I don't know. I don't know how I feel. I need to go through it again and maybe it'll be better. I need to see them testify again and it's been a while. And so I just I'm going to have to listen to it again before I can, how I feel like when I was first watching this, like at 16, or 15, 15 or 16, I felt like how it's so difficult for victims to come forward, right? Just in general, from that type of abuse. It doesn't get talked about, especially back in those days. And for them to get up there and testify, them being boys, it being their father, it having gone on for so long. Like it was one thing for Lyle, right? It was bad for Lyle, but his abuse, that type of abuse for him was very short-lived. But according to Erik, it was going on all the way up until the murders. And so I found that to be very compelling. But I was much more naive back in those days and didn't have as much true crime experience as I do now. And so I'm kind of curious to see if I watch it again, if I will feel the same. That's why I haven't really come out and said one way or the other, because I formed my opinion when I was really young. And I think if they would have been honest from the beginning and not said, somebody, broke into the house or my dad was, doing, he had shady business dealings and, he was probably working with organized crime and stuff like that. If they had maybe told the truth from the beginning, I think it would have been better for them. But I think that a lot of their behavior after the fact is what caused people to side-eye them, and then, yeah, it's hard. I want to believe them, I want to believe that they would not get up there and testify that, say those things and lie about something like that, because it's so hard for victims to come forward. And it makes it so much more difficult when we have a case where it's a lie. It just sets, oh yeah, we're going to rewatch it. I just wanted to start with the opening statements, but yeah, it makes it so difficult. And I would, I want to believe that they wouldn't get up there and lie about something like that. I really do, because of what it does to victims. There's something about Lyle, though, that bothers me. And then to some extent, lesser extent than Lyle, but Erik too. There's something there that I can't quite put my finger on. All right, here we go.
Lyle Menendez also told the police that the maid had Saturdays and Sunday nights off. In another portion of the discussion, Lyle Menendez was comforted by the detectives that both of his parents had not suffered and had died instantaneously. Lyle Menendez and the detectives discussed possible motives for the killings, and the subject turned to Jose Menendez's business dealings. Lyle Menendez told the police that his father had received threats from people. He discussed the possibility that his parents' deaths were linked to organized crime, and also discussed his own needs for a bodyguard because he was being followed. Lyle Menendez made the statement that, quote, "It's pretty difficult to get good security," unquote. But from what we now know, this hint that his own life might have been in danger because of his parents' killings was a lie.
Oh, there's something else I forgot to tell you guys too. So earlier in her opening statement, she referenced this night trip. Okay. Now, the way that it was portrayed in 2017 on the Lifetime movie is that, and it's sort of, you don't really catch, it's not overt what it is that Kitty and Jose supposedly do on this fishing trip that makes the boys think that their lives are in danger. It's the way that it's portrayed in the Lifetime movie is like I said, it's just like this vague notion. You don't see anything overt. What you see is them on the boat, they're fishing, and Jose makes some kind of gesture, and then there's like a glance exchange between Lyle and Erik, right? And then it's on the way. It's after that happens back at the house. Lyle and Erik are talking, and they come to the conclusion that their lives are in danger. And I realize that those concepts are very difficult to translate onto film. So I understand that that's why it was dramatized in the way that it was, but I don't ever even remember, and it might come up through the testimony when they testify, but what it was exactly that happened that caused them to feel like their lives were in danger on that trip. I just never quite got that. But anyway, let's continue because we got a long way to go.
In response to the police questions about any problems that Lyle might have had with his parents, Lyle Menendez told the police that he and his mother had recently quarreled over the fact that he had locked himself out of the family home and he had to wake his mother to get inside, a fairly trivial incident. He said that he had no other problems with his parents. While the police were there questioning Lyle Menendez, they noticed that he was wearing a gold Rolex watch, and he confirmed that he had purchased it shortly before his parents' memorial service, which the evidence will show was on August the 25th. He also indicated that he had charged the Rolex watch on his father's credit card. By March of 1990, 6.5 months after the killings, the police were getting ready to make arrests for the murders of Jose and Mary Louise Menendez. Around this time, Glenn Stevens, Lyle's best friend from Princeton, flew from Princeton to Los Angeles with Lyle Menendez and another Princeton student named Hayden Rogers. Once in Los Angeles, Lyle Menendez told Glenn Stevens that he, Lyle, had called back east to the East Coast and had discovered that the Beverly Hills police detectives had been there recently. Glenn Stevens will describe Lyle as being made nervous by this. At this time, Lyle took approximately $2,000 out of his pocket and divided it between Glenn Stevens and Mr. Rogers. Lyle Menendez told Glenn Stevens that should anything happen to him, Mr. Stevens should contact Lyle Menendez's attorney. Lyle Menendez also told Mr. Stevens that there were only two people who knew everything, his attorney and a man named Dr. Oziel. Lyle Menendez explained to Glenn Stevens that Dr. Oziel had some cassette tapes in a safety deposit box, and that if the police ever got their hands on those tapes, he, Lyle Menendez, would be, and I apologize, fucked. On March the 8th of 1990, the police executed a search warrant at the home of Dr. Oziel. The police searched a safety deposit box belonging to Dr. Oziel and obtained a cassette tape which contained Dr. Oziel's verbal notes of 2 psychological sessions he had had with both Erik and Lyle Menendez. Lyle Menendez was arrested the same day by the Beverly Hills Police Department for the murders of his parents. Lyle Menendez's prediction to Glenn Stevens as to what would happen to him if the police got their hands on the Oziel tape had come true. The shotguns used in the murders were never recovered. After searching Dr. Oziel's safety deposit box, the police were led to the San Diego area in search of records which would show the purchase of shotguns.
Okay, these tapes, this is another thing that was portrayed very, very differently in the Lifetime one. And I'm really shocked that I have recall over this because it's been a long time since I saw that movie. But the way that this situation was portrayed in that movie was that the tapes, how it came to light that the tapes even existed and how they got into the police's hands was that the doctor was having like some sort of romantic relationship with the secretary at his office, and she got mad and made copies of those tapes and then took them to law enforcement. And I don't know. I don't know why they portrayed it that way, because this has nothing to do, and they don't talk about it at all in the trial. And this is why I'm very curious about how monsters will be portrayed, because these are the facts of the case. And when you try to tell a story, you do, in order to translate some of the concepts, you do have to take some dramatic license. But this was in 1993, Nicholas. So you're spot on, 1993. Yep. I don't know if you could even find a patent leather headband nowadays. It's a good look, though. I'm not going to lie. I do love a good headband. All right, here we go.
After visiting several stores, the police went to a Big Five sporting goods store. In searching the records, they discovered firearms purchase records in the name of a man named Donovan Goodrow. Early on in the investigation in September, the police had traveled back east to interview family and friends of the victims and the defendants. During this visit, the police confirmed that Lyle Menendez had a friend named Donovan Goodrow, who lived on the East Coast. When the police saw Donovan Goodrow's name on the purchase records for 2 shotguns in San Diego, which were purchased 2 days before the killings on August the 18th, 1989, the police knew that they had hit pay dirt. Donovan Goodrow will tell you that on August the 18th, 1989, 2 days before the Menendez killings, he was not in San Diego buying 2 shotguns, but instead was working in a restaurant in the city of New York. Mr. Goodrow will also tell you that he had been a roommate of Lyle Menendez's in the spring of 1989 at Princeton University, although he himself was not a student at Princeton University. Lyle Menendez kicked Mr. Goodrow out of his room. He no longer wished Mr. Goodrow to be his roommate.
Aw, Tess. Thank you, babe. I'm sorry you got a headache, and I hope you feel better. Okay, so I can't highlight your comment, Carolina, but I read it. See, that's what okay, so this is the other thing. So she's going to circle back to the doctor's, these tapes. And she's going to mention that there's no report of SA in those tapes. And they're literal tapes, cassette tapes. So I hope you feel better, Tess. It's this is why I think this is important to watch all of this, because this is the trial. This was the first trial. This is, the evidence was the evidence. It was presented to 2 juries, and both juries were hung, resulting in a mistrial and then a retrial in 96. But the only thing different from between 93 and 96 was the abuse was not allowed to be talked about. All right, here we go.
And in approximately May of 1989, Mr. Goudreau left for New York City. Mr. Goudreau will also tell you that he discovered that his wallet and identification were missing when he traveled to New York. Glenn Stevens will tell you that Lyle Menendez bragged to Glenn Stevens that he had stolen Mr. Goudreau's wallet in order to get back at Mr. Goudreau because Lyle Menendez suspected that Donovan Goudreau had stolen money from Lyle Menendez. Lyle Menendez also indicated that he would forge Mr. Goudreau's signature to obtain this retribution. Amanda Adams Greer was working at the Big Five sporting goods store on August the 18th. She will explain to you the various forms that were filled out to complete the purchase, and you will see the name Donovan Goudreau on those forms. You will also see a copy of his California driver's license, which was in his possession before he left Princeton, and you will see that Mr. Goudreau's license number is also on the firearms transaction forms, filled out in part by one of the brothers and in part by Ms. Greer. You will also learn that the address given on the form, that is the firearms transaction form, is a location which is unknown to Mr. Goudreau and is in fact an address which does not exist within the San Diego area. Ms. Greer, the firearms saleswoman, will also tell you that the purchase was made with cash and that she did not sell any ammunition when she sold the 2 shotguns. A handwriting examiner from the district attorney's office will testify about the firearms transaction forms. He will tell you that he cannot be 100% sure of whose writing appears on the forms, mainly because there's not enough handwriting on the firearms transaction forms to make a comparison. But between the signatures of Donovan Goudreau, the handwriting of Lyle Menendez, and the handwriting of Erik Menendez, the expert will tell you that the signature on the firearms transaction forms was most likely made by Erik Menendez. He will also tell you that the name Goudreau on those firearms forms is misspelled. In the summer of 1990, Lyle Menendez was ordered by a judge to provide a handwriting sample for the purpose of making comparisons for this handwriting examiner. He refused to provide a sample of his handwriting. In June of 1990, when he made this refusal, there was no way he could have known that the handwriting examiner could not make a 100% comparison because the handwriting examiner did not perform his comparison until 1992. In spite of Lyle Menendez's refusal to provide a handwriting sample, other samples of his writing were obtained in this case. I have mentioned Dr. Oziel, the therapist whose tape led to the arrest of Lyle Menendez. You will hear testimony from Dr. Oziel, and he will tell you the following. On the evening of October the 31st, 1989, approximately 2 months after the killings, and also the night of Halloween, Dr. Oziel was in his office and he called Lyle Menendez at home and asked him to come to the office. When Lyle Menendez got there, his brother Erik Menendez and Dr. Oziel were already there. Dr. Oziel informed Lyle Menendez at that time that Erik Menendez had confessed that Erik had murdered his parents. Lyle Menendez became extremely agitated and informed those present that Erik's confession was very stupid and that now it was no longer a perfect murder. Lyle Menendez was fearful that Dr. Oziel would tell someone of the brothers' participation in the killings, that he, Lyle Menendez, did not want anyone looking over his shoulder, and that is why he had killed his parents. Erik Menendez left this session before Lyle Menendez, and then Lyle Menendez left. 2 days later, on November the 2nd of 1989, the brothers again visited Dr. Oziel. At the beginning of the session, Dr. Oziel explained to Lyle Menendez why it was necessary for Erik Menendez to confess the murders to Dr. Oziel. Dr. Oziel explained that he was keeping notes of the sessions, and Lyle Menendez was alarmed by this. Dr. Oziel told the brothers that notes of those sessions were being kept in a safety deposit box, and that Dr. Oziel had given keys to this box to several attorneys, and that he, Dr. Oziel, had instructed these attorneys to open the safety deposit box if he should die mysteriously.
Okay, so now this part of the situation has always been very murky to me. I know that there is a doctor-patient confidentiality. However, I need to look into it a bit further with respect to crimes, because I think that a psychiatrist or a doctor also would be a medical doctor, which I guess a psychiatrist is with that too. You know what I'm trying to say. Anyway, I think that they are under the obligation to report if you have committed a crime or you are going to commit a crime. And this part where the Dr. Oziel says, I've taken notes, which you would think is something that would have been established at the beginning of, prior to the session starting. Usually when you go and you see a psychologist or a psychiatrist or a therapist, they tell you how they work, that they're going to be taking notes and not to pay attention to it and, all of the things, right? They don't typically tell you, I'm going to be taking notes. And, oh, by the way, now that you've confessed to this heinous crime, right, I'm going to keep those notes in a safety deposit box, and I'm going to make keys and distribute them to my lawyers that in case anything happens to me, that they go and retrieve these notes from the safety deposit box. Something about this has always sounded so sketchy to me. It just doesn't, it sounds so fantastical, like it's almost something that is made up for a movie. You know what I mean? It's just so extra. It makes no sense to me. And I don't know. I don't know. This part has always confused me. All right, here we go.
This was Dr. Oziel's life insurance policy. Dr. Oziel explained to Lyle Menendez that he and his brother should attempt to be treated psychologically for whatever it was that had caused them to kill their parents. Lyle Menendez told Dr. Oziel that there really wasn't anything to work on because what had caused him to commit murder was no longer here. He had killed them both. During the second conversation on November the 2nd, the defendants told Dr. Oziel that they killed their father because he controlled them and made them feel inferior while preaching morality to them. They went on to acknowledge that they saw their father as being basically a moral person. Dr. Oziel asked them why they had killed their mother. The gist of what Dr. Oziel will tell you that they told him is that Mrs. Menendez was killed because the brothers had made such a good plan to kill their father, and the plan included their mother, that they just had to keep her in the plan. According to Dr. Oziel, the brothers considered not killing their mother, but decided to go ahead anyway with her killing because their plan was too perfect to alter. Besides, they told Dr. Oziel, their mother had been depressed lately and probably would have been unable to live without their father anyway. During the rest of the November 2nd session, the brothers were entranced with the perfection of the crime that they had committed. Lyle expressed sadness at having killed his mother, but acknowledged that he had fired the shots which, in the end, had killed her. Dr. Oziel asked Lyle Menendez if he felt guilty about inheriting millions of dollars from his parents. Lyle Menendez laughed, but went on to explain that he had not committed the murders for money. Lyle Menendez told Dr. Oziel that his uncle had suspected that the family computer contained another will, which would have disinherited the brothers. Lyle explained to Dr. Oziel that he had arranged to have the computer's hard disk erased to avoid the possibility of a second will. The defendants went on to tell Dr. Oziel that they killed their parents out of hatred and a desire to be free of their father's domination and impossible standards. The defendants did not tell Dr. Oziel during these two sessions that the killings were done in self-defense or that they had suffered any physical or sexual abuse. During the second session on November the 2nd, Lyle Menendez expressed concern that the notes that Dr. Oziel had kept never be revealed. Lyle told Dr. Menendez how embarrassing it would be if he were found out. Lyle Menendez joked to the doctor that if a robber ever tried to break into Dr. Oziel's home and shoot him, he should be aware that the robber would probably be shot, and that when he looked up, he would probably see Lyle Menendez saying, "Have a good night's sleep, Jerry." Lyle Menendez had made an uneasy alliance with the man who held his secrets. The remainder of the November 2nd session dealt with the defendants' upcoming trip to Hawaii and where they should stay on the islands. It is anticipated that the people's case will take less than a month to present to you. During that time, we will prove to you that Lyle Menendez planned this murder, provided false identification for the purchase of 2 shotguns, set up an alibi, acquired ammunition, repeated the alibi to the police shortly after the crime, and then set off to spend the money which he had acquired through the killings of his parents. Based upon this evidence, it will become apparent that this murder was unlawful, unjustified, and wholly premeditated, and that it was accomplished through a conspiracy into which Lyle Menendez entered with his brother, and that but for a few mistakes they made, this was almost the perfect murder. Thank you.
All right, thank you. And there will be an opening statement by the defendant as well. And we'll take a short break, and counsel has some material that they want to organize for the defendant's opening statement. So if you would all go back into the jury room, and we'll have you come out in 10 minutes, and we'll resume with the opening statements. Certainly.
Menendez killed their parents.
Okay, so there is a little kerfuffle in the middle of that, and basically, both the Lyle and Eric's attorneys both were upset by some things that were mentioned in the opening statement. The first one being that Lyle stole that guy's his wallet with his ID and everything in it, because they had, I guess, talked and gone through pretrial, and that way it wasn't going to be mentioned that way. They objected to the fact that she called the computer guy. She said that Lyle referred to him as that Jewish guy, or that little Jewish guy, and that was inflammatory, which, if he said it, and it is the way that she says it. It's demeaning. It wasn't, he said it in a demeaning way, which ironically is how they ended up. If he had not said that, they wouldn't have. It's his description is how they found him in the first place, but still, and the life insurance. They objected to that. And the judge was like, look, okay, I don't know what you're talking about. We never really did resolve any of this stuff. But at the end of the day, opening statements are not evidence. The jury is not to, and I'll give them an instruction that they're not to take it as it's evidence. This is just what the attorneys, intend to prove with their case. And that's what he does. So before she starts, he talks to the jury and he basically says, if they're opening statements, it's not evidence. It's basically, an outline of what the attorneys intend to prove or what they believe that the evidence will show. That's it. Also, congratulations, Little Red, on your son having being in honor society in high school and in college at the same time. That is amazing. Congratulations. Congratulations. That's fantastic news. All right, here we go. Let me rewind this just a little bit. All right, here we go.
I'm never going to be able to get from here to there. So as I speak, I'm going to merely direct your attention to the board since I have a lack of space here. Menendez killed their parents. We're not disputing where it happened, how it happened, who did it. We're not disputing when it happened. The only thing that you are going to have to focus on in this trial is why it happened. And the prosecution has suggested to you that it was done for money. It was done to commit the perfect crime. It was done possibly out of hatred. And what we will prove to you is it was done out of fear. You will be given a great deal of evidence to evaluate. In deciding whether you believe that this crime, that these children killed their parents for money, you'll get an idea of what their life was like before. They were living in a Beverly Hills mansion. Lyle was attending Princeton University. He was driving the brand new Alfa Romeo he got for high school graduation. He'd had credit cards since he was 15 for both phone and to buy whatever he wanted. They had the most expensive tennis coaches. They took expensive vacations. And everyone who knew Lyle said Lyle Menendez, knew he had all of the money that he needed. His father had been on a meteoric rise within the last couple of years, and things were only getting better. He was going to make more money the next year than he had the last, and more money the year after that. He was aggressive. He was talented. He was going to win at any cost. But his family was going with him wherever he went, and money was not going to be an issue. Lyle Menendez was going to be supported by, directed by, controlled by, and taken care of by his father for the rest of his life. His father had always picked his schools, his friends, tried to control his girlfriends, decided where he was going to work, what his future was going to be, and had talked of his plans to buy a compound in Florida in which there would be houses for not only Kitty and Jose Menendez, but one for Lyle and whomever he would marry, and one for Erik and whomever he would marry, and various other relatives. So there was no real concern that he was not going to have money and be taken care of all of his life. The prosecution is going to produce evidence of certain purchases, of money that was spent by Lyle Menendez after his parents died. There's information about the watches. He bought a car. He made offers on a couple of condominiums. The only one that actually ever closed was the condominium in Princeton, which his parents were in the process of buying for him, at the time of their death. It was to close in about 2 weeks. Lyle had helped pick it out, and they were going to pay for it. You will also hear that he purchased a restaurant, and you will hear from his aunt and uncle about their decision to go along with this idea because of their desire to give some structure to the chaotic existence which followed the death of his parents. You will be given information which will help you, I think, to understand the grief process, and that everyone does not experience it the same way, and that even people who kill other people mourn their loss, miss them, and love them. If this wasn't about money, then what was it about? This trial will take you behind the facade of the rich houses, the fancy cars, the wealthy friends, and impressive social engagements. It will take you to the life that was experienced by Lyle Menendez and his brother as they grew up. There's a picture on the board in the middle, which is a picture of Lyle and his little brother, Erik. All of his life, he was responsible for protecting Erik, and he didn't always do it. And in fact, he sometimes hurt his brother. And as he grew older, the responsibility that he felt for him, for this child with whom he shared a war-zone life, became even stronger, and his sense of guilt over some of his shortcomings loomed very large for him. The events which took place on August 20th, 1989, had their genesis long, long before. But immediately before the killing, in those last few days, that last week, an event began which set all of this in motion. Erik Menendez told his brother Lyle Menendez that he couldn't stand it any longer. His father had been molesting him for 12 years. It had gotten more violent, and he couldn't take it. He needed help. He couldn't get out. He couldn't leave, and he couldn't take on his father. And so he turned to his big brother. And his big brother, who had a fairly nice life going for him at the time, had spent the summer at tennis camps, was going back to Princeton in the fall to live in this new condominium, had a girlfriend all lined up that he'd been establishing a relationship with that summer, could not turn his back on his brother. Although shocked to hear that this had been going on for the 12 years, he believed Erik. He believed him because he was his brother, but more importantly, he believed him because he remembered what had happened to him when he was much younger. His experience with his father in terms of molestation had been for a much shorter period of time. It was from about 6 to 8. But he remembers what it felt like. He remembers the fear and the confusion, the importance of being loved and made to feel special by this charismatic, powerful man who was the center of his universe. He also remembered that when he was 13, he sensed something was going on with his brother. And gathering up all of his courage, he prepared for a talk with his father, as he always prepared for a talk with his father. He made notes and he rehearsed because he didn't want to lose the ability to deliver the message that he had to give him by virtue of being ridiculed for his grammar or laughed at for his lisp or in some way derailed from his purpose. And so at 13, he went to Jose Menendez and told him he knew what was going on and he wanted it to stop. And his father promised him that it would. Lyle decided that it worked when he was 13, or at least he thought it had. So he was going to try the same procedure again. He was going to talk to his dad about it. Only now he was older. He posed much more of a threat. He could tell people. Maybe somebody would believe him now. He knew he wouldn't have been believed at 13. But maybe at 21, he would be believed. So he, again, prepared for a talk with his father. He made notes, he rehearsed, and then he confronted him. And he told him that he knew what had been going on, and it was going to stop. And it was going to stop now. And his father was going to let him take his little brother and leave the house. He had underestimated his father grossly. His father indicated to him in no uncertain terms that Erik Menendez was his son, and he would do whatever he wanted with his son, and that no one was going to threaten him, and no one was going to control him, and no one was going to have a secret like this. with which to destroy him. He made it very clear to Lyle Menendez that this secret would never leave this family, and that the people who held this secret and this power over him would not be allowed to live. Needless to say, this was not what Lyle had envisioned. Had his brother told him before this conversation, rather than after it, the details of the torture and the sexual abuse he had endured, he would have had a clearer picture of the man with whom he was dealing. Lyle's violent experiences with his father had been, for the most part, when he was young. He respected, admired, loved his father, but more than that, wanted to be loved by his father and found worthy. He didn't think on a daily basis about all of the signs in the past, and he didn't think clearly about them before he spoke with his father. The next few days, he went back and forth between fear and hope, sure that what the message was of impending death, and yet hoping that somehow Dad, who could always fix everything, would somehow find a way out of this for the family, that somehow he would let him know it was okay. And over the next few days, different events occurred which accelerated the brother's fear. On Friday, after this conversation with his father, on Thursday night, and after finding out from his mother that she had known all along of Erik's abuse and didn't protect him, the brothers decided to go buy handguns. That seemed like a smart way to protect themselves. What they didn't know was you can't go in and just buy a handgun. You have to wait 2 weeks. And they figured they probably wouldn't be around in 2 weeks. So they went to another gun store and they talked, and someone said, why don't you buy shotguns? That's what people use to protect themselves. It didn't seem to be nearly as good as being able to have a handgun on you, but it seemed better than being there unprotected. And so they bought the shotguns. They used Donovan Goudreau's driver's license. Donovan had been a very close friend of Lyle's, far closer than Glenn Stevens. And Donovan, because of some things he had done, made a lot of people angry. And Lyle's friends, including Glenn Stevens, and Lyle's father demanded that Donovan be thrown out of the dorm room. Lyle didn't want to do it, but he knew that if he didn't, his father would come do it for him. And so Donovan was ordered out of the dorm room and left behind a number of things, a bag with a lot of objects in it, and included there was Donovan Goudreau's license. And a witness will tell you, not that Lyle gleefully took this with some nefarious purpose, but that she found it on the floor when helping move Lyle out of the dorm room a short time later. Erik Menendez carried that driver's license because he was under 21 and physically quite similar to Donovan. On the date of the shotgun purchase, Lyle did not have a valid California driver's license. His license here had been suspended some time before, and he'd been living in New Jersey. When the prosecution talks about this plan, this carefully crafted alibi, it so happens that Lyle Menendez had made plans to go to the movie on Sunday night sometime before. And on that day, he made a plan to meet Perry Berman and his friend Todd Hall afterwards. He wanted to be out of the house. And these plans, which the prosecution now wants to characterize as an alibi, merely proved where he wasn't. Alibis generally are someone saying you were somewhere else, and they can prove it at the time of the crime. And so his plans with Perry Berman merely highlight the fact that he didn't show up where he was supposed to be. They said they went to the movies, and I guess a good plan would have been to have movie tickets, but they didn't have those either. Certain incidents happened right before the parents died, which led these children to believe that they were about to be killed. And they acted. And when it was over, they waited. Although their home was very big, it happens to be close enough to the neighbors' homes that you can hear the television set in your neighbor's house, particularly on a summer evening in August when the windows are open. They knew that when they fired off multiple rounds from shotguns, 2 of them, that everyone would hear, and they did. Any number of neighbors heard this noise. What they didn't count on is that no one called the police station, which was only minutes away. And in that period of time while they were waiting, they made a decision. Maybe we don't have to go to jail. And maybe we don't ever have to tell what happened to this family we want to be so proud of. This family of whom we are a reflection. This family with whom our identity is inextricably tied. And they turned on the light in a room which had previously been illuminated only by the television set, and they picked up shotgun shells. Somehow that seemed like the thing to do. They dumped the guns. They went to the movie theater to get tickets for the movie they were going to see, but it was too late. Couldn't buy tickets. But they did find out that one of the shows had been sold out in that trip.
Okay, so Carolina says it's very frustrating that the defense was very limited in the evidence they were able to show the jury back then. So in this trial, which was the first trial, there were two. They were the abuse was allowed in. However, in the retrial in 96, it was not let in. And I feel some type of way about that. And here's why. I think that if there is a trial and it results in a hung jury, that a retrial should be exactly that. All the evidence that was let in the first trial should be let in the second trial. And, maybe because this happened with Betty Broderick. She had to be retried. The first trial resulted in a hung jury. In the second trial, she was convicted, but it wasn't because they kept evidence out. It was because Betty testified in both trials, and in the second trial, they caught her in some lies. And so she just was, a terrible witness the second time around. I think she got way too self-assured and thought she had it made. And but I think that when it comes down to a situation like the Menendez brothers trial, and the prosecution is not just proving that the murder happened, right? They're proving the motive, and they're laying out evidence of that motive. And the defense is saying, we're not saying that the boys didn't commit these murders. We are objecting to the reason why. I think that it should have been let in. And I think that a second jury should have, second jury for both of them should have been allowed to hear that evidence there of why they did what they did. I think that, I just think they should have let it in. That's just what I think. All right, here we go. We're almost done, you guys. We're almost done. Thanks for hanging in there with me.
To the Taste of LA to try to meet their friend Perry Berman. They didn't have a real sense of what time it was and had no idea that it was far too late. And when they got there, he wasn't there. So Lyle Menendez called him on the phone. And Perry Berman will tell you that he heard something in Lyle's voice, some sort of anxiety, some heightened emotion. And he said, "I've got to see you. I've got to talk to you. It's really important. Meet us at the Cheesecake Factory." Convinced Perry to meet him there. And as they left the Santa Monica Civic Auditorium to go to the Cheesecake Factory, both of the boys continued the emotional falling apart that had begun much earlier. But Erik was far more hysterical. Erik was always very emotional, cried easily, and was falling apart. And it was up to his big brother to try and take care of him. He was the one who was supposed to be there for him. So they drove back home. They couldn't continue this any longer. They needed some resolution of it. And yet they didn't want to tell what really had happened.
So this is a good question, Kimberly, but was there any tangible evidence or just their testimony? There was never any, I don't want to say that. I can't remember, honestly, if there was ever a physical examination of Erik or Lyle or both of them. But it wasn't just their testimony. There was relatives that testified that they had witnessed and knew about some things. And so there was that. But I honestly cannot remember if there was a physical exam conducted on Erik or Lyle or both of them. I didn't. I don't remember if there was or there wasn't. And if I'm remembering correctly, there is a cousin who testifies on their behalf, and it has something to do with something she walked in on, like at the end of some kind of situation occurring, and she was a little older than the boys, but she even was not old enough to really know what she had witnessed. Only that it didn't make sense to her. And if I remember correctly, she also testified about Erik having an aversion to, I want to say that it was ketchup or mustard. But I can't remember which one it was. I mean, I do think, Carolina says, Lyle and Erik Menendez have been locked up for 30 plus years. Gypsy Rose got out after 8. Make that make sense. I will say that there is a definite disparity in the sentences. Absolutely. I don't, same here, Lil Red. Lil Red says, I never heard anything about physical examinations, only a cousin saying it's true and an aunt saying that she suspected. That's how I remember it. But yeah, that's how I remember it as well. All right, here we go.
And so they called the police. Lyle Menendez called 911. And you will hear the tape. And there is no question that he lies in the tape, but the emotion is genuine. He goes down to the police station to be interviewed, and Sergeant Edmonds will tell you there was not a doubt in this police officer's mind that these boys were genuinely upset, but they weren't going to tell. They'd made that decision. And so they told not a sophisticated story, not a substantiated story, not of being somewhere where witnesses could say that they were, they didn't produce movie tickets. They just said we went to the movies and then we went to Taste of LA. The police very early on suspected that the boys were responsible. They began to look at the spending, which I guess if you're going to cover up a crime, you wouldn't begin a few days later by spending a large amount of money on Rolex watches and then start making offers on condominiums and buying expensive cars.
Right, counsel, let's not argue the case, just make an open statement of what you expect the evidence to be.
We will be able to show you that there were things, that there were facts that show that this was not done for the money. The boys believed they were out of the will. Jose and Kitty had been discussing taking them out of the will, had told various people they were already out of the will, including their sons. The sons knew that their father's business was required to have a $5 million insurance policy on it. It was one of the employment perks that he had. And they knew that their father had not yet taken the physical examination and was scheduled to take it within the next few weeks. They did not know about the one insurance policy, which was the only money that they ever received after this. Their aunt had arranged that with their father, and they never even knew that it existed. The prosecution has told you of the confession to Dr. Oziel. You will hear what Dr. Oziel has to say. You'll have the opportunity to observe him. We will provide you with additional information which will assist you in evaluating Dr. Oziel's credibility. The brothers had made a decision that they were not going to reveal the family secrets. And so they gave him some information, and Dr. Oziel filled in some of the blanks himself. What you will hear in this court from Lyle Menendez, from his teachers, from his coaches, from his friends, his neighbors, his relatives, will be the story of what life was like for him and his brother. You have to remember that the child to whom some of these things happened was not the 25-year-old young man sitting here today, but the young man pictured up on the board. For Lyle, most of the sexual abuse and violence occurred in the years before he was 10. He was arrested in March of 1990, and he first spoke of his abuse, not to his lawyers, not to the media, but to his family. After he told his family, he began talking to me about it. And after that, we brought in the experts who you will see here in court. They are not the people who make their living testifying in court. You will see Dr. Stuart Hart and Dr. John Conte, both of whom are university professors, one at Washington and one at Indiana, who have made it their life work to study and evaluate violent families, psychological maltreatment, and child abuse.
Okay, so at one time, the Court TV website had this trial on it. They started moving some of the stuff that was over there over to YouTube, but they don't have the entire trial. I have to go look on their website, but if they don't, I know that they don't have the entire, if I can't find it from Court TV, I know a few other channels that do have the entire trial. And so I think tomorrow night we're going to watch Erik Menendez's opening statements, and I'll have some other stuff for us to go to look at as well. So we can hear, but I definitely want to play the brothers testifying. I also want to play, there's a video of the trial from the day of the shooting. That's where the testimony of the day of the shooting happens. And so I want to watch that. But I also want to hear what their expert witnesses say, both for the state and for the defense, because I think that that's it's important.
These experts were brought in and given free rein. They were told they could spend as much time as they wanted with Lyle Menendez. They could review any documents they wanted, see any photographs we had, interview any witnesses they wanted. And what they did was to each spend over 60 hours apiece with Lyle Menendez, just the expert and Lyle Menendez. They then read over 2,000 pages of interviews with people. They looked at photo albums of the entire family history. They talked to me, they consulted with other experts, and they each selected 10 to 12 witnesses whom they thought were important, and they interviewed those witnesses individually. By now, each of them has spent over 300 hours on this case. They have seen and read and talked to everyone they wanted to talk to. They've met with family members, they've interviewed friends, girlfriends, coaches, and teachers. And for months, they gave no information of what their conclusion was. And they will tell you here in court what a year and a half later they have discovered. They will explain to you the type of abuse that was suffered and the effect that it had. They will explain to you what happened to Lyle Menendez and what the relationship was of those events to what happened on August 20th, 1989. Lyle Menendez will also testify here in court. You will have an opportunity to see him, to hear him, to evaluate his credibility, and to watch him be examined and cross-examined here in front of you. And what Lyle will tell you will be that he got several messages from his parents, from his mother, who didn't want him in the first place, and told him all of his life, that he had ruined her life, that she could have had a great career in broadcasting or drama, but for him. He was told on a regular basis that he was inadequate. He was humiliated, degraded, and rejected by this woman who in the last 3 years of her life was violent, unstable, drug addicted, alcohol dependent, and obsessive. He lived in a world of contradictions. For most of the time, the house was filthy. The laundry piled up. The ferret, who was never trained to go to the bathroom wherever he should have, went to the bathroom all over the house.
Oof. See, now, and I get why they're having to do this because of the defense that they're raising in this trial. But I say this all the time. When you attack the victim, it is a roll of the dice. And that's why I kind of wish that they would have allowed the same evidence in the second trial that they allowed in the first trial, because I feel like because of that, people are under the impression, and I'm people, I'm people. If it feels like they made that the judge made that ruling, and by extension, they weren't allowed to present their evidence. And so therefore, they didn't actually get a fair trial. They weren't allowed to say what what happened to them. And so it doesn't seem like a fair trial if they can't testify. And I am just curious if all of that had been presented, and if the defense again went in so hard, especially on Kitty. Cement. I'm going to have to go back and look, because exactly what the ruling was and why that it was not allowed in. And I used to know the answer to that, but now it's like, and I remember it, I looked at it today, but it's gone out of my brain. It's been a heck of a day. But I will find out tomorrow and tell you why it was excluded from the second trial, because I think that's important to know. And I should have written it down. I should have known I wouldn't remember, and I should have written it down. So I apologize to you guys on the live chat. And if you're watching on replay, I apologize to y'all too, because I should have written it down. All right, here we go. Get back to it.
They would have boxes and boxes and boxes of carnation bars and no other food. And then his mother would decide she was going to sell Shackley vitamins, and all of the toys would be thrown out, and the cupboards would be filled with the vitamins. He was punished by being put under her bed, where it was too small for him to turn over, which happened to be one of the areas the ferret liked to use to go to the bathroom. He will tell you of doing his term paper, and when called by her not responding soon enough, and having her rip it up in front of his eyes. He will tell you of being chased by her with a knife, of calling to her when she's in the kitchen making dinner, and her cutting herself, and her smearing her blood on his face, and making him sit through dinner, and his fear that he was going to have to go to school in that condition. He will tell you of the abandonment, which a number of people saw. Kitty Menendez had to drag her children with her shopping. But her solution was to leave Lyle Menendez and his younger brother in his care and go shopping. And eventually they'd be picked up by the security guards. And eventually she would be paged. And she would tell the people she was shopping with, "That's fine, I know where they are." And the children would sit with the security guards waiting for her to come back. They would be left at school and at tennis practice for hours afterward. The message was always the same. I didn't want you in the first place, and I don't want you now. You get in the way, you ruin my life. And this was complicated by the fact that Jose Menendez took an extraordinary interest in this first child of his heir apparent. And there's an interesting photograph on the board on the left side on the bottom, which is Jose Menendez with his little boy, Lyle Menendez, in exactly the same posture, in exactly the same position, hands in pocket, foot on stairs. And Lyle Menendez was Jose's great project. What one of the relatives says, he was to be the corrected version of Jose. He was to have all of the things that Jose didn't have. Well, all of us want for our children the best. We all want for them the things we didn't have. But for him, the particular areas of concern were the fact that he did not get to have the special training and coaching so that he could have been the swimming star he thought he could have been. He lived his life humiliated by the fact that he was surrounded by Ivy League graduates, and he'd gone to Queens College. He also, for reasons that I think are described by his background, resented the fact that at age 15 he had to leave Cuba, where he loved to tell everybody he was a member of the aristocracy, and came to America, and he had to do menial work. He had to support himself. He had to wash dishes and sweep floors. He was going to get back his social position and more. And his son was going to be the prince. He was going to play tennis, have the best coaches. He was going to go to Princeton. He was going to have all the money he needed. He was not going to suffer any of the degradation of being working class, which was so offensive to Jose. And it was interesting because he ran into a woman, Mary Louise Anderson, who had a lot of the same issues. She was the daughter of a divorced family in a small Irish Catholic town in Illinois, where people didn't get divorced in the 40s. And she was ostracized. She had a violent, bigoted, cruel father who left her mother. Her mother was at first emotionally unstable enough that she was hospitalized and spent the rest of her life mourning the loss of her husband, and gave Kitty Menendez the same message that Kitty Menendez gave her children.
Well, damn, this lady going all the way down the family tree and just reading them all for filth. The whole family's messed up. My goodness. I had forgotten about all this, you guys. And the ferret ain't no good either. Yikes. Bad news bears in the Menendez house.
You know, things were fine until kids came along. Kids change your life. Well, kids changed Kitty Menendez's life, because now Jose spent all the time that he wasn't either spending working or with his girlfriends with his son. He told his son he was special. He told his son he was going to be great. He would spend hours with this little child in the basement, giving him inspirational talks, passing along motivational material, drilling him on tennis, making him repeat, making him memorize, conditioning him to have all of the thoughts that Jose thought were right, and none of his own. One of his cousins says one of the most amazing things about Lyle Menendez as a little boy was he would start a sentence to tell you what he thought. He'd glance over at his dad and see that look of disapproval, and midstream, switch that sentence around to the other position, which he knew was the right one for his dad, regardless of what his own views were. The children saw Jose Menendez as all-powerful. He flaunted the law. He bragged of his illegal acts. He told with glee of firing people and destroying careers. He reveled in his sadism. He talked to them about all he could do. He was the shepherd and the rest were the sheep, a message that he passed on to his son and made him memorize. He convinced his son that he was inept, that he was helpless, that he was stupid, and that he would never make any kind of a life for himself unless his father was there to help him. He grafted his own ambitious, hostile personality on a child with absolutely no regard.
Counsel, I said, don't argue the case. You've been going through a lot of this in argument rather than just presentation of what you expect the evidence to be.
Witnesses will tell you of a young man who was shy, introverted.
Hold on a minute. Now, that is the second time this judge has admonished her, and she doesn't even acknowledge the judge. She doesn't say, yes, Your Honor, okay, Your Honor, thank you, Your Honor, nothing. She just keeps on going. And I don't really know that she's exactly, she might be arguing the case a little. She might want to start out with saying something like, we expect the evidence to show, or we're going to put witnesses on who will testify to this. It's a little much.
You will hear of what dinner was like at the Menendez home, what other people called Jeopardy dinners, where you were quizzed and the price for not knowing the answer was to be made to feel stupid. If you didn't swim well enough, you were yelled at. You were held underwater. When you played tennis, you were drilled and drilled and drilled. And where other kids played for an hour, you played for 6. And when Dad wanted to teach you reflex drills, he hit the ball as hard as he could directly at you. So the Lyle Menendez walked away from many a reflex drill with a number of welts. What happens to this child who is supposed to be perfect when it turns out he has a speech impediment? He's ridiculed, he's laughed at, he starts a sentence and is humiliated and stops talking. He walks like a duck with his feet out, and his father quacks and tells him not to walk with him. It's too embarrassing. When at 14, he's still
Wait a
letting
minute,
the
wait
bed,
a
his
minute,
sheets
wait a
appear
minute.
on the breakfast room table.
Wait a minute. This is such an antithesis of how she started, right? She started out saying that the way that Jose viewed Lyle was that he was going to be the better version of himself. And yet everything that she says that he's doing is not going to make a kid be the best version of themselves or a better version of you, if that's your goal. It's to subjugate them. How can you be the best and be subjugated at the same time? I just, I mean, I'm not, she is detailing the abuse, Paula, but it's the way that she's doing it. She, it's, I forget, I don't know how to, I can't explain it the right way. Give me a minute.
When he brings a rabbit home from school and his mother says, your father wants to have you get rid of it, and he doesn't do it for a few days, he comes home and asks his mother where the rabbit is. She says, ask your father. And his father tells him, go to the garbage. And there is the rabbit with its head smashed. Others who lived in that house knew that when Jose took off his belt, someone was going to get beaten. You didn't know who, and you didn't know why. And when Lyle had the nerve to go into a deli at about age 7 and buy some junk food, and his father looked in the bag, he didn't lecture him about health or rotten teeth. He just socked him in the stomach. And when in wrestling, Lyle grabbed him in his genitals, playing around during the time he was being molested, Jose took him and threw him into a table, a coffee table. And you will still see the scar on his eye. And we have a photograph, and we have medical records.
Okay.
Lyle also has a scar that runs down his lip to his chin.
All right. You see how she said, she explains a situation and she says, we have a photograph. That is an opening statement. Saying the evidence that you have that's going to prove, basically she's listing the abuse, right? But there were times when she was talking about Kitty and Jose that she's being more argumentative and not saying, there's going to be people who will testify to the fact that Kitty cleaned out the cabinets and put took out the toys and put vitamins in the cabinets instead of the toys. You got to say that it's, you expect the evidence to show, or we have a witness who's going to testify that, whatever. And she kind of didn't do that.
When he was about 16, he was out practicing tennis. And his father watched him and came and harassed him and pushed him in ways that his coach said he'd never seen done before. And when Lyle yelled at him to shut up, his father grabbed him, put him in the limousine, which was his father's usual means of transportation, grabbed him by the throat, and socked him square in the face, and said, if you ever embarrass me again, I will kill you.
Yikes.
The Menendez family blended sex and violence. They showed porno films to neighbors who were outraged and then bragged they'd shown them to the children. They had no boundaries. The boys showered with their father to the very end, and their mother in their teens was still coming in the bathtub and bathing them and washing their hair. The problem is children love their parents and want to be loved by them. And so they stay and they endure and they believe they are responsible. And between the years...
Yes, counsel, again, this is not the opportunity to argue the case. It's the opportunity to give the jury an idea of what you expect the evidence to be.
Okay. Between the years of 6 and 8, around the time Lyle was playing soccer, as you can see from the picture on the right, his father extended these intense conversations into massages. He told them that this was the type of thing that the Romans did, that this is what fathers and sons do, that he was special, that this was a special bond that they had. And he began the sexual molestation. And Lyle felt confusion and fear, but he also liked the attention. And he also liked the fact that Dad thought he was important. But as things progressed, objects were used, which hurt. And eventually there was an anal rape, which hurt even more. Lyle confronted his dad, screamed at him, told his mother, please ask Dad to leave me alone, he's hurting me. She said, your dad loves you. You have to be punished sometimes. The teachers will tell you of the pressure that they saw and of the sadness they saw. And they will admit to you that they didn't interfere and they didn't protect these children because they were afraid of the parents. They were afraid of Jose Menendez and they were afraid of Kitty Menendez. The coaches will tell you of the brutality and the control exhibited through the lessons, and those who wouldn't go to the extent that was required were fired. In 1986, the family moved to California, and about this time, Kitty Menendez discovered that her husband had been having an affair for approximately 8 years. An already unstable woman now got worse. She was seeing a therapist on a regular basis. She was taking massive dosages of antidepressant drugs. She was drinking. She was acting in all kinds of obsessive ways. She was leaving suicide notes for her sons. She was attempting suicide. She was threatening to poison the family. A crazy woman got even crazier.
Oh, wow.
During the last week, Lyle and Erik Menendez talked to each other about experiences that each of them had had that the others didn't even know about. They talked about a mother who was willing to die and willing to kill. They talked about a father who was not going to be controlled by anyone or anything. They talked about parents who can treat their children as objects, who can abuse and use and degrade them. And they knew that these were parents who could kill their children.
All right, is that the opening statement for the defense? Okay. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we'll take a recess.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're not going to take a recess. We're just going to, stop right there because that was a lot. This is the thing about what she did. Okay. To me, it's just my opinion. If you don't have it, she said a lot. Particularly, I actually think that she might have went in harder on Kitty than she did on Jose, which is weird because he's the one that's, being accused of committing the most egregious crime, right? But she was harsher on Kitty. And that is, like I said before, always a dicey proposition unless you can get witnesses up on that stand that support the argument. And in that way, it reminds me, it just makes me wonder, what if the state hadn't offered Gypsy that good of a plea deal? Would she have rolled the dice and gone to trial? And if so, what would her trial have looked like? Because she didn't mention anything about her mother forcing her to be in a wheelchair or forcing her to tell people that she had cancer, or convincing Gypsy herself that she had cancer, and all the various things. They would have definitely had to a large part of Gypsy's defense would have basically been putting Dee Dee on trial. And I wonder, with all the contradictions, if that had gone to trial, if that would have worked for them, if that would have actually been a viable defense. And that's where I'm at too, Kimberly. It's the way that she's presenting it is what's making me and this is his attorney, almost makes you be like, this is way too much. We do know, it's sad, and rationally we recognize that unfortunately things like this do happen to children, but it's the way that she's putting it all together. And the whole reason that they moved from where they were in New York to Beverly Hills is because Jose had all of this. He was doing all right in New York, right? He was doing actually pretty well, but he made it big time and then moved to Beverly Hills. So I don't understand. It's very confusing when all of this would have taken place, especially with regard to Kitty was selling, vitamins, and they were left at the mall, and, just some of the stuff like this, or that they lived in filth. It just makes you wonder, well, when did that happen? Well, Carolina says, a dang mouthful. Whoa, actually, there were witnesses, but the defense failed to put them on the stand. A lot of family members witnessed Kitty Menendez's vices. Yeah, I mean, I find it's interesting to me. We're going to get more into this because I want to see, um, you know, the defense doesn't have to prove anything, right? The burden of proof is on the state, but their assertion is this was not about money. This was about abuse that had gone on for the most of the boys' lives, and that they were so sick of it, so fed up, so backed into a corner that this was their only option. And I just find it interesting that that's a very difficult, defense to mount when you conversely on the prosecution side, right? You have the fact that during that initial 911 call and subsequent interviews and statements after the fact, Kyle and Erik continued to not tell the truth. And if you're planning to put the defendant on the stand, right, and they have lied before, there's going to be, that there's a possibility that the jury is going to pick up on there might be a credibility issue. It would seem to me that the best way to boost their credibility would be to have as many witnesses as possible that can testify. So, yeah, I know that they talked a lot about Jose's rise financially in the documentary on Peacock. So I'll have to go back and watch that. But anyway, that is all that I had for you guys tonight as far as this goes. Now, I will tell you, I've been sitting here and listening to this, and while I'm listening to this and thinking about what's going on and and all that, I'm also thinking about the situation with Wendy Adelson. And when Charlie's attorney decided to defend Donna, that would have been a conflict from jump, okay? Because it is the prosecution's theory, which I happen to believe, that Donna Adelson is who set this whole murder of Dan Markel up to begin with. It came from her. It was her idea. This is what she wanted done. And Charlie Adelson facilitated it. And so for his trial lawyer to now be representing Donna from jump would have been a conflict, but it was allowed. And now at the 11th hour, y'all, her trial was supposed to start today. Jury selection was supposed to start today, if I'm not mistaken. And yet, what happened? All of a sudden, now it's a problem. It feels very, and I don't like to think this, but it does feel like this might have been the plan between Charlie Adelson and Donna all along. I don't know that the attorney was in on it, but I wonder it. I mean, they're cahooting cahooters. Look what they cahooted to do. This is why they're on trial, or well, he's been convicted, but this is why she's now on trial. And it's so bizarre to me that this happened, and they have a status hearing a month from now, and no new trial date at all. Like, it wasn't even discussed. just frustrating. I've been, but anyway, that's really all I had for you guys tonight. I did make a new intro instead of showing the old outro that I have. I'm going to show you guys the new intro as the outro tonight. But I want to thank you guys all very, very much for being here. I appreciate it so very much, each and every one of you. If you have not done so, would you please do me a favor and give your girl a thumbs up on the stream or a thumbs down, whatever floats your boat. I don't judge. And I will see you guys back tomorrow night. I'll look into some more stuff and have a better presentation for you guys. You guys have a great rest of your night, and I'll see you tomorrow. Bye.